Hello, everyone. This is part 2 of week 5 of Plato, a class on the Protagoras, Phaedo, and Sophist, and we are currently talking about the Phaedo. We are now turning to the second argument for the immortality of the soul, which invokes an idea that Socrates' interlocutor says Socrates has talked about often in the past. So that is a cue for us, as it were, to ask, when did he do that? Do we have access to earlier conversations or conversations that Plato thinks the reader maybe is already familiar with? Now, to some extent, that would involve tricky questions about the relative chronology of the dialogues, and we don't want to go there. But I do want to talk a little bit about the theory of recollection in Plato's Meno. There is reason to think that the Meno might be earlier than the Phaedo, or at any rate, maybe they are both written roughly around the same time. So the Meno might give some evidence for this idea that Socrates talks about that a lot. So what is recollection? In the Meno, there is a problem that Socrates and his interlocutor Meno discuss, and that is sometimes called the Meno problem. It is also sometimes called the heuristic challenge, where heuristic refers to sophists. So it is a kind of sophistic problem, hopefully a problem that only the sophists raise and we can somehow solve it. The problem is that it seems that inquiry, investigation is impossible because either you know something or you don't. If you know it, you don't have to inquire about it. If you don't know it, you don't know what to look for. And if you found it, you wouldn't recognize it. That is just a short version of a very complicated problem, but that is enough for us now. In response to this heuristic problem, there are, I think, 4 possible solutions. The first is recollection. Recollection says, or rather, Socrates says that priests and priestesses told him this story. And that is the theory of recollection, namely that prior to being born, the soul saw all things. And now learning is recollection. So the things that the soul saw prior to being born are latent knowledge in the soul. And then when you learn something, this latent knowledge or dormant knowledge is as it were reactivated. And here's another important premise: because all things in nature are akin. Once you recall some things, you can sort of also get to the other things because they are related to each other. So that is what priests and priestesses say. It is not presented as a theory in the sense that it would be defended by argument. It is a story or a view ascribed to priests and priestesses. And then in the next step, Socrates says, well, here's also another argument, and that is the lazy argument, Argos logos. And it says that if we were to believe this heuristic challenge, we would be lazy, and we are more active if we believe in recollection. Now, again, that is not, strictly speaking, an argument for the theory of recollection in any kind of theoretical sense. It is maybe a motivation for wanting recollection to hold. Then the next step in the text is that Socrates, as it were, demonstrates how recollection might work by, calling a boy who hasn't studied geometry and getting the boy to solve a geometrical puzzle or problem, even though the boy has never studied geometry before. And so the thought is, well, how did he come up with this? It must have been somehow latently in his soul, because otherwise, since he didn't study geometry, how would he have come up with it? However, when the boy comes up with the correct responses, these responses are called beliefs, not knowledge. And we were sort of promised that the soul has latent knowledge. And then the claim is that for these correct beliefs to turn into knowledge, the Boy would have to do more geometrical exercises, and then the beliefs would sort of become steady and settle down and turn into knowledge. Now, that was the third step. The fourth step is that then the long final stretch of the dialogue, Meno develops a method that Plato adopts from geometry, and that is called the method of hypothesis, where we don't work with any beliefs, but rather we can engage in inquiry simply by starting from hypotheses. And now you might think we don't need recollection at all in order to answer the Meno problem, where that is the problem. How can we investigate? We can simply use hypotheses. We don't need knowledge, we don't need belief. We just work with hypotheses. So one way of reading the Meno is to say we actually don't need recollection or the theory of recollection in order to solve the problem of how inquiry is possible. And I want to invite you to now ask yourself whether maybe we need recollection in order to solve the question of whether the soul is immortal.